Hi, thanks, Polly. Hi, everybody. Really great to see everyone joining us again today after a busy day at school, nursery, and your settings. So we're going to have an opportunity to have a bit of a discussion right now about the Early Years Toolkit. And we're going to put you into breakout rooms because we want you to really reflect on what did you learn from your review of the Early Years Toolkit and what are the areas of your work that you want to develop. So we're going to open up those breakout rooms, give you about 10 minutes to chat, to really think and reflect, and then we'll have 5 minutes of opportunity to feedback, and we can use that via the chat function. So we're going to open up those breakout rooms for you to have those conversations. There we go. So we have just spent some time in breakout rooms thinking about the Early Years Toolkit. And what did you learn from your review of the Early Years Toolkit? Are there areas of work that you want to develop? And there were a few of us who were in our own sort of little group here in the main chat. And actually, it was really interesting to hear from a couple of members of the group just talking a little bit about, particularly about parents. So if you want to put in the chat any of your thoughts, anything that you have discussed in your group, that would be really great to share. And obviously, if anybody wants to unmute and share something that they have highlighted, that would be wonderful for people to hear also. So we're just thinking about those strategies from having looked at the Early Years Toolkit and the things that you want to be able to develop. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jackie. So Jackie talked about developing a play cafe, thinking about, how to really support parents with that developmentally appropriate play, and also just the modeling. And we talked a little bit about the impact of the pandemic and lockdown and parental kind of expectations about children being able to regulate those tricky, difficult emotions. So we've got another couple of points here, thinking about scaffolding learning, but also knowing about when you're standing back. And also a good point from Catherine here about really thinking about how to embed practice across the whole of school. Really, really good points. And that you are looking at the Thrive approach. I did just pop in the chat a link to the revised parents guide, which used to be called What to Expect When, which is now What to Expect in the Early Years Foundation stage. And the reason for just adding that in was just linked to a couple of points that people made about supporting parents to help their children to work through those really tricky emotions, those meltdowns, what to do and how to approach it and how to be sensitive and supportive and how to co-regulate. Which is absolutely fundamental to being able to support children. So that is in the chat, and I can put it in the Padlet as well for people to access, because there are a few little activities and links to other organisations as well. So just another couple of points in the chat, comments about parents not necessarily being as resilient themselves. So yeah, actually we do really need to make sure that we're supporting parents to regulate. The adult has to be able to regulate and support themselves as well to be able to co-regulate young children. Yeah, so not necessarily as resilient as previous years. And obviously we've had to really focus even more on those nurturing relationships, those high quality interactions. Absolutely. Brilliant. Some really great points there. And these are things for us to really consider. And what Polly's going to kind of reflect on next is really thinking about, well, yeah, so if we've identified these key things from the evidence, how do we implement them? How do we really kind of hone in on those key components of implementing opportunities to really support children's developing self-regulation?
Thank you, Fliss. And I just wanted to pick up on Valerie's comment as well about accessing the toolkit and whether there were actual examples. So normally in the toolkit itself, there is a kind of summative overview, but then there are normally links to specific examples. So it depends on which, and I think it's fair to say that some of them are more theoretical and some of them are more practical. So it probably depends on which ones you went into, but the toolkit is generally more practical than the guidance report, I would say. So definitely check whether it was the toolkit rather than the guidance report that you were looking at. In the implementation section of the toolkit for self-regulation, it summarizes that self-regulation strategies have high potential, but they can require careful implementation. So we know it's really important. We know self-regulation can make a really big difference. We know from our conversations last week that a lot of the time we're already focusing on this in EYFS. But we also know that implementation is hard. It might sound like it's a simple thing to ensure that you're maximizing the use of your child initiated time, for example. But we all know the day-to-day realities of making the space and time for this kind of work. So the toolkit identifies 4 considerations that we need to think about when we're planning for implementation of these strategies. The need for the time and space to develop skills, the need to assess for self-regulation. How will you know if it's improving? How will you use those measures to monitor impact? And how do you manage classroom time and the balance of what you do in classroom over time? And I want to unpick those questions a little bit here, because as we move towards thinking about taking this knowledge about self-regulation and using it to develop and improve our practice, we need to think about that quite purposefully at quite a granular level and quite carefully, because we all know how easy it is to have the best of intentions and for the day to run away with you and to come away feeling like that's going to have to be added to another to-do list for another day. So a little bit later on, Fliss is going to talk more about the professional development side of things, but I think it's worth noting that here, in embedding self-regulation strategies, when we're talking about the time and the space for professional development, it doesn't have to be a major program of professional development. It doesn't have to be getting in a kind of training offer, but it still needs the time and the space allocated to it. So whether what you would like to do is individual reflection, it still needs the time allocated to it. You can't just do that on the fly and still have the same impact. You might decide that you want to use coaching or peer support. I have always found, especially when it comes to strategies that you use in child initiated or play-based learning, that video reflection is a really powerful tool. Whether you have something like Iris as a tool available to you or not, or just recording yourself using a tablet or something, because for me, that time when children are playing, there's just so much going on that it can be hard to get a true sense of what has happened during a child's learning over just a couple of minutes of time, and it's really powerful to do that. For the assessment, how do you assess children's current capabilities in self-regulation, managing their own behaviours, their interactions with other children? There are indicators that we all use already as part of the early learning goals, as part of our measurements towards working within the early years foundation stage profile. So in the characteristics of effective teaching and learning, for example, in self-regulation itself, in personal, social and emotional development, there are all kinds of things that we're already looking at and assessing in our observations of children or in measures that we're reporting on. And implementation is just as much about making sure that you're not doing extra stuff for the sake of it. So it doesn't mean that you need to create a new set of measures in a tick box that needs to be charted, but just what are you going to look at? What information do you have that's going to help you to know whether this has been a good use of your time or something that you should change for doing something else, because our time is so valuable when we're working with young children. There are some other kind of frameworks that I'll look at in a minute that I think can also be helpful when it comes to looking at the kind of monitoring and evaluation of the impact of what you're doing. Like I said, for the monitoring and the keeping track of progress side, I just think it's such an important principle to not be creating extra workload here, but be creating the time to think and reflect on what you're doing. Sometimes just having that time for a conversation at the end of the day can be drawing on that data that you already have in your own knowledge of children. And balance of time is, of course, always a really critical issue in early years, and one where I think it really helps to have a solid sense of what we're trying to achieve in each of our different time allocations, especially, you know, if you're working in a context where you're having to negotiate or justify the balance of time that you're spending on different activities as well. So self-regulation can be developed through play and through direct explicit instruction, but the balance is really critical. You're not likely to get the same outcomes just through some teacher-directed time as you are through having child-initiated play. As we heard from Professor Baker, that element of child agency is really critical, and giving them the space to develop agency and to have that ideal level of Goldilocks challenge makes it very difficult to do solely with direct instruction, which I hope is, you know, an empowering message for those who are kind of communicate. I know that there are those of us, because I've been there, negotiating for greater kind of space and time for developing these skills in our play-based provision, and that it really is a powerful place for that to happen. There are some key elements that have been highlighted in the sessions, in particular ones that Professor Baker talked about in our discussions and the research that we have referred to you, that I think can just help as prompts to think about, as I said, getting granular about what in our settings we would adapt, what we would improve, what we've got, what we would enhance when we're looking at developing self-regulation. There are more ways of thinking about this. I've just tried to pull out some kind of themes from what we have talked about and what is in the guidance reports, because another really critical element of implementation is choosing the specific thing to focus on for now, because you can't take on board the whole self-regulation and metacognition guidance report and do everything at once, or you can try, but I think it would be really challenging and have limited effect to do it that way. So we heard about challenge. That's the first one. We heard about challenge when Professor Baker talked about the critical role of challenge in those Goldilocks moments, that point at which the ideal level of challenge is, it's not so easy that you don't have to try, but it's not so hard that you don't have the opportunity for success, but gives you that chance to develop your self-regulation, and also how you're scaffolding those challenges so that children gradually face them, become more independent, have that great opportunity for success that motivates them to keep on trying. And that motivation element obviously plays another really critical part here. Challenge can, of course, be built into the learning environment, so they're not necessarily totally distinct from one another, but the environment that you create is an important tool for developing self-regulation. There are practical tools out there that you can use to develop your learning environment, like the ECHAS 3 evaluation, for example, or the Lego Learning Through Play experience tool, which can help you to understand how your physical environment, how the adults' roles and interactions are playing a part in developing opportunities for self-regulation for your children, and also in kind of observing the children over a period of time that allows you to understand how they are experiencing self-regulation as well. You know, I think one of the examples that Sarah used was how are the resources organized in your setting, and are the children aware of the organizing principles? So did they know when they go to the bookshelf where they're going to find the kind of books that they like, for example? I can see in the chat the tools, a request for the names of the tools. So they will go onto the Padlet as always. But ECHAS 3 is the Early Childhood Environmental Rating Scale, and it's just the 3rd edition. And then there's another tool which is called the Lego Learning Through Play Experience tool, which is another framework for like a rubric through which to look at your setting. Curriculum and planning. So just like all of the other areas of the early years curriculum, we do need to think about how we sequence and scaffold self-regulation activities. As an example, so plan, do, review as the model for child initiated is something that's mentioned in the EEF Toolkit, as well as in the Self-Regulation and Metacognition guidance report. And that doesn't stay the same throughout the course of the year. You scaffold it carefully, you sequence it carefully, so that in the beginning you're supporting children to quite simply make a decision about what they're going to do. We've all experienced those children who just sort of bounce around the provision, going from one thing to another, but encouraging them to take the time to think and decide and articulate what they're going to do. And gradually that grows to become something where children are carefully planning the steps and the resources that they're going to need to complete their activities, that they are monitoring their own learning whilst they are playing. So, they're identifying where they made their model rocket and the bottle isn't sticking to the box, and they need to think about a different kind of if they're using tape or glue to do it, but they're aware of that process of iteration that they're going through, and then afterwards they're able to talk about it and reflect on it, and share what their thinking process was. And as Fliss shared in those lovely examples from Tanya Chowdhury's research, that they're also able to reflect on other children's learning as well, and to talk about what other children must be doing and thinking in order to come to the decisions that they have, which really over the course of time is quite a sophisticated level of understanding of metacognitive and self-regulatory processes. But that has to be achieved by a careful development over time of the language and the skills and the processes for achieving that. And very much linked to that is the role of reflection in the development of self-regulation strategies. So, and I mean that in more than one way. I mean for children. So children's reflective capabilities can be developed, and the encouragement to think about what they have done and why they have done it and what they could do next time is really powerful for them, and for them to begin to reflect in the moment as well on how they can adapt what they're doing, but also of our own practice and our reflection on what's happening in our settings, what's happening in our interactions, can be really useful for us as we develop the self-regulation of our children, and the job is never done, is it? So our own self-regulation as well. Yesterday, a fantastic paper came out that was authored by Professor Sarah Baker and her research team at Peddle in Cambridge, making space for children's agency with playful learning. This obviously will be linked to on the Padlet. It is an open access report, and it is a very accessible report as well. I really encourage you to have a look at it. This is a model that is not their own original model, but is one that they share as a way of articulating the interconnectedness between all of these elements that we have been talking about. So it's not a case that you are ever solely developing self-regulation. There are important critical components that you're thinking of and interacting with there, in particular to do with agency, learning and motivation. And the hypothesis of this article is that play is the avenue into that with young children. I also really recommend the report because it explores agency and self-regulation through a variety of different theoretical lenses. So whilst the Education Endowment Foundation doesn't kind of promote a particular curriculum or educational theory, in early years, there are a variety of different ones that different settings subscribe to. If you're a traditionalist setting or Montessori or whichever kind of setting you are, this paper explores what self-regulation might mean in that context. And I personally found that comparison really helpful for thinking about what it might look like in practice in different kinds of philosophies, because I do think it's very easy to talk about this at a generic level, and then when you're trying to fit it into the practice in the system within which you're working, you have to take a lot of those steps yourself. But I think that this paper is really powerful for helping people to do that as well, which covers the I suppose that the principles or the lenses through which I considered it might be useful for us to begin to identify the specific areas that we wanted to develop when it came to self-regulation in our contexts. And what we wanted to do next, and what Fliss is going to talk to you about now, is how you take that from the idea, the thing that you want to improve or the thing that you want to achieve, to an implementation plan, because the Education Endowment Foundation also provides some really brilliant guidance on making sure that we don't miss that step where we have the great idea to the realization of it, by thinking through the stages of that process.
Thanks, Polly. So yeah, so we're going to talk a bit about the implementation process. And this figure is taken from the Putting Evidence to Work, A School's Guide to Implementation. And it's the implementation process diagram. I like to call it the implementation cake. So that's what we often talk about. Oh, you know, the cake image and the 4 kind of sections. But the key point of showing me this is to sort of build on what Polly had said about, you know, we know that self-regulation strategies have high potential, but they require careful implementation. And I think something that we really need to consider in schools is, again, reiterating what Polly said, making space and time and that a priority to really, really plan carefully. You know, it's very easy for us to rush through this process. And what we know from the evidence is that actually this really, for successful implementation to work, it has to happen in a series of stages and it has to unfold over a period of time. And actually, when we're really busy and enthusiastic and we want to kind of get going with something, it's very, very easy for us to forget that. But actually, I mean, I'm sure we can all think of examples of new initiatives or something that we've wanted to do and been really fired up about and raced to kind of deliver it in our schools, and it's not really worked effectively. And that's not necessarily because the thing that you're trying to do isn't right or, you know, powerful, but actually that process is really, really important. And so you can see here that, you know, this is not about a single event. It's not, you know, when a school decides to make a decision or a setting makes a decision about adopting something new, you know, it has to kind of really begin before decisions are made and last for that whole period afterwards. So you can see there are these 4 sections. So implementation is therefore often described as a series of stages with activities in each of those stages relating to exploring, preparing for, delivering, sustaining the change. So that explore and prepare phase, that's half of that cake, is all about kind of laying the foundations. And there's lots of great anecdotes about, you know, sort of sowing the seeds and so forth, so that actually, you know, those plants, and you can kind of see those little images, will really actually take hold and grow and sustain. And so one of the kind of messages that comes through from this guidance is this idea of the value of doing fewer things better. So that's really important, isn't it? And okay, we're thinking about self-regulation strategies that we know have high potential. But what we need to do is we need to think about, in that explore phase, you know, okay, so we've identified the priority, which is self-regulation. We know that that's amenable to change. We have systematically kind of gone through looking at the evidence and the research. And now it's kind of like time to kind of think about it in the context of your setting. You know, you really have to remember that actually, you know, we do have this evidence base that is really powerful, but it's always important to remember just that key thing about evidence-informed practice has to come with professional judgment and expertise to be able to really be fully informed, because what might happen where I work might not work for Polly's children in her setting, you know, so we do have to remember that as well. There's that contextual kind of information. As you can see, so we've got explore, prepare and deliver. Now I'm just going to show you on the next page a slightly adapted version of this. So a more early years kind of implementation cake process cycle. So Dr. Julian Grenier's book about putting the principles of the new EYFS into practice, he talks about this in terms of quality. So if you just move on to the next slide, Polly, I just can show you this next stage. So this is an adapted version. And so some of you may find this, you know, a little bit more appropriate when thinking about early years, but essentially the concepts are the same. Implementation process begins. You've got these 4 phases: explore, prepare, deliver, sustain. And so actually, you know, just really kind of thinking about it, because the point is that quality matters to all children, and particularly those disadvantaged children. And so we want to make it right, and we want to get it done in such a way that's going to be effective and have lasting change. So this is taken from Julian's book, and he has a whole section around improving quality and how you improve quality through thinking about implementation, but also thinking about effective professional development. And again, that's something to really consider. So similarly to the implementation process, when we're thinking about effective professional development, it's not just a one-off thing. You know, we do have to really plan for it very carefully. So on the next 2 slides, there are just a couple of excerpts from Julian's book. And I just think it's, you know, a really useful kind of points just to look at quickly about, you know, actually, we need to make sure that when we're giving our teams, our practitioners, our educators, you know, professional development, we need to make sure that there is this secure grounding. And so again, if we're thinking about through the lens of self-regulation, how children develop and learn, the kind of content and pedagogy, and we've really kind of thought quite a lot about that, and that's just over 3 sessions. So actually, you know, when we're thinking about it over a more sustained period of time, making sure we kind of include all these kind of important key factors, it's really, we have to kind of go through that phase, don't we? We have to make sure that we're actually exploring and preparing and be really kind of considered with what we are trying to achieve. So the second part of this, when we think about this effective professional development, is about the interactions. And again, if we're thinking about this through the lens of self-regulation, children's emotional well-being, really thinking about how to listen and attune to children, you know, making sure that actually, you know, we want to encourage children's early learning. And if we think of all of the various different kind of strategies that we've identified through looking at the evidence, you know, this is all incredibly powerful stuff that's going to really support children to move through that process developmentally, to have that co-regulation, and to be able to start to begin those important elements of becoming a self-regulated learner. So just on this next slide, just kind of highlights the last key things about thinking about our own learning as adults as well, and making sure that we take that into consideration. So there's adult learning in terms of the fact that we need to be able to have time, space, time, bandwidth to discuss and reflect on our own learning as well. We must have those opportunities to think about these new ways of working, to try them out, to practice. And we also need to receive feedback on how we're doing. You know, that's really important, isn't it? We need to know whether we're doing it well. We need to try things out. And that's all part of this sustained process. And finally, just to consider leadership and management. To be effective in really kind of utilizing professional development, it has to be carefully planned. It has to take into account the context of your setting, your children. You really have to think about that. But we also need to think about how it is chosen with care, drawing on that body of research. And that's hopefully what we've shown you through these 3 sessions, is that body of rigorous research that we're guiding you to look at. And now it's time for you to think about, well, okay, so how can I take some of that and develop it further and think about it in my setting? So as Polly had also talked about, there are some other kind of key things that are really important to kind of factor in as well. Things like mentoring, coaching, peer observations, very, very powerful kind of approaches to supporting. And I've just pulled up just this slide here, just really to highlight also that alongside the the implementation guidance from EEF, there is a new professional development guidance report. And this slide here, this image here, shows these kind of cogs, which are referred to as the mechanisms. And they're just some key things for people to consider when thinking about that professional development, about when you want to implement something new, how to really maximize that professional development, so that you can build that knowledge, you can really motivate your staff, you can really help them with those techniques, and think about how to embed that practice. So there is a whole report based around these particular mechanisms and evidence review, and also just some key things to think about how to reflect on those important things when you're thinking about this kind of professional development that you want to do for your team. So if you're going to go away as part of your plan and think, right, I really want to think about this evidence-based, these self-regulation strategies, how to develop my team further, you know, use these, because they're really powerful resources. So, and the next slide, I'm just going to talk very briefly again, just a few more bits about that implementation process. So just so you can kind of remember that actually, you know, there are, within that guidance report, there are 6 headline recommendations, but it's just really to make sure that we're thinking about it as a key part of ensuring that whatever we do is going to make a difference for the children. And I'm going to show you, so this slide here just highlights the prepare phase, which is the second little chunk of the cake. And the key thing from this is about how you create a clear, logical, and well-specified plan. So you've identified what it is that you want in that explore phase that's backed up by that evidence research. You're thinking about those effective professional development mechanisms and the things that are going to really help you support that training that you want to offer your team. And actually what you do then is think, okay, so let me map it out into this really useful kind of format, a very clear plan. So the EEF provides a template for this, which we have on the screen here for you, and you can download it. And it just helps you kind of think through those stages, you know, what it is that, you know, what is the problem. So when we talk about what the problem is, that sounds like a little bit of a negative statement, but the point is that say, for example, in this instance with self-regulation, we want to develop children's strategies to manage their feelings and behavior, their emotional well-being. You know, that's what you're trying to focus on. And it's all about how are you going to achieve that? So a really useful way of mapping it out, and it just helps you be really strategic and think about those 4 phases and the process through which you go through over that period of time. So we don't rush it, we really think about it. It really helps you factor in all of those just all those elements and variables that will be relevant to you and your setting as well. So we have a short video to show you. This is a video from the Early Intervention Foundation. So it's a charity, and they have kind of developed this sort of 10-step process to really thinking about how to implement a new program, a new intervention, something that you want to implement in your setting. Now, the term that they are referring to is this idea of a theory of change, and that's how, and this video is going to explain it a little bit more, but it's how you go through this process and how you create that logical plan so that you can really think through what it is that you want to achieve, how you're going to do it, and how it's going to work in your setting to have maximum impact on our children, because that's ultimately what we're here for. So fingers crossed the technology works, and we can watch this video. Polly, can you just check the sound? I'm not hearing anything at the moment. Thank you.
I had a feeling that was going to happen.
See, a Zoom session without some tech.
I know, I know. It was all going.
I've come to learn over 22 months.
I might have to reshare the screen.
There is that little box that you can recheck. I wonder if that might help. We will put this in the Padlet as well, so that you do have access to it.
It does. I mean, you can read what it says, can't you, as well?
Yeah.
I'll keep it going with the words while I try and figure it out, so that you've still got the words going.
Change to logic models, feasibility studies, pilot evaluations, impact assessments, and quality assurance for interventions offered on a wide scale. The first and most important step towards demonstrating your intervention's impact is the development of a high-quality theory of change. A theory of change encapsulates some crucial details about why your intervention is necessary and what it aims to achieve. A theory of change can come in many different visual or written forms, but whatever it looks like, it should answer some fundamental questions about your intervention. Why is the intervention needed for children's development? Who is the intervention for, and what are the crucial characteristics of the people who will be taking part? How does the intervention work? What is its content, and what will the participants do? What is the primary outcome for the children taking part? And why is this outcome important to their development? Together, these features of an intervention start to paint a picture of how an intervention works. It's also the essential first step in being ready to evaluate the intervention in the future. Articulating a theory of change is vital for several reasons. It enables you to communicate the rationale for an intervention both within your organization and more widely. To recognize and start to address any uncertainties or risks in your plans for the intervention. To ensure everyone involved is on the same page, which can help improve how your intervention is delivered. And to lay the foundation for future evaluation, which will test whether your intervention has achieved what was intended. Learning the lessons from this evaluation will help you to refine and adapt your theory of change and improve the effectiveness of your intervention in the long run. It may seem obvious why a particular intervention is needed, or how it will work to improve children's lives, but often there are a set of assumptions involved, which may not have been tested, and may not even be true. Let's imagine an intervention that aims to reduce aggressive behaviour in children under the age of 10. This intervention works by spotting children showing signs of aggression and giving them extra playtime. The idea is that this will give them more time to learn better social skills, which will improve their behaviour now and reduce the risk of serious behavioural problems later. There are several assumptions involved here that we would need to investigate if we were trying to produce a high-quality theory of change for this intervention. Does playtime improve social skills? Is a lack of social skills associated with increased aggression? Does improving social skills improve behaviour for children who are being aggressive? And does this work in the long run? It is essential to answer these questions to challenge your assumptions if you're going to produce a good theory of change and set yourself up to evaluate the intervention in the future. The best way to remove the untested assumptions from your theory of change is to use the existing evidence from scientific research. You can use what is known from research into child development to pin down who the intervention is for, to clarify what the content will be, and to identify its primary outcomes for the people taking part. Intervention developers frequently rely on their own experiences to answer these questions. These experiences can play an important part in creating a theory of change. However, Using science will allow you to reflect on any hidden assumptions about how your intervention operates. Using findings from research helps you to iron out the uncertainties and untested assumptions in your theory of change. As a result, interventions that are rooted in findings from research have a greater chance of having a positive impact on the lives of children and families. Let's think again about trying to reduce aggressive behaviour in young children, and look at a science-based theory of change based on what the academic literature says about child development. All children are aggressive during the preschool years. In fact, human beings are at their most aggressive between the ages of 2 and 3. Coercion theory is based on the observation that many parents inadvertently reinforce aggressive behaviour when they argue with their child or give in to their child's demands. In other words, aggressive child behaviour coerces ineffectual parent responses, which in turn coerce more aggressive child behaviours. This suggests that one way to tackle aggressive child behaviour is to break this cycle. This intervention would work with parents and caregivers of preschool-age children. Parents and caregivers would be taught strategies for responding more effectively to their children's aggressive behaviour. In the short term, parents should learn and be able to use these new strategies. In the medium term, their children's behaviour should improve. In the long term, improved behaviour should support children to avoid crime and other forms of antisocial behaviour. This theory of change explains why the intervention is needed, how it would work, and what it would achieve, working from a set of science-based assumptions. By referring to the academic literature, you can incorporate into your theory of change what we know about children's development and how interventions can influence outcomes. Developing a good science-based theory of change helps everyone involved in your intervention to understand and explain why it's needed and how it will work. It's also the vital first step on the evaluation journey, so that you can demonstrate the positive impact your intervention is having on the lives of children and families. For more information, see 10 Steps for Evaluation Success at www.eif.org.uk.
Thank you, Polly. I'm so glad we were able to actually watch that. I think it's a really great, useful video, just kind of outlining just how powerful it is to use that evidence base to make sure that actually we're getting all of our information from credible sources and making sure that we do test those assumptions, because actually we have ideas about things that might work, but actually we need to go back to that body of literature so that we can be really clear. And we've highlighted quite a lot of that literature, that body of research throughout these sessions. And this is now this opportunity for you to think about, okay, so if I'm thinking about self-regulation in my context and I want to develop an action plan, think about that implementation process, then this whole kind of idea of a theory of change is going to really help you be very clear about it. And again, as the video says, it's all about how we make a difference to the lives of young children. So we have to be intentional and thoughtful about this. Thanks, Polly.
Thank you. So really helpful context on implementation aligned to all of the research base and examples that we have considered with regards to self-regulation development in particular. So we really wanted to use the next 10 minutes as time for you to set aside, to use now, to think about how you pull that together. So to do some action planning, we'll put you into breakout groups to do that. Really recommend that you have either, pen and paper, or that you're typing up the notes, because even just 10 minutes I think is a valuable amount of time to set aside for this. So think about what element of what we have talked about is likely to be the most powerful lever in your context. What is it that you want to achieve in your setting? Where are the self-regulatory changes likely to have the biggest impact? And what can you do? So is it to do with the professional development in your team? Is it to do with your learning environment? Are there more effective ways that you can be assessing and understanding children's development? We've covered lots of different angles through which you can look at it. So it's an opportunity to combine those two components of this session. One, what is it that you want to do? Or what is it that you want to achieve? And two, how are you going to get there? and using those tools and the thinking, the planning ideas that we have covered to think about how to do that. So we'll put you into some breakout groups for the next 8 minutes and then come back with a couple of minutes to wrap up before the end of the session. There's some people getting booted out of breakout rooms again.
Not sure. Let's try again.
So mysterious how Zoom does that sometimes.
Yeah.
All right. As you're coming back in from your breakout groups, please do feel free to pop into the chat the ideas that you've had, what you are thinking about implementing as a consequence of considering self-regulation, questions that you have that came up from your conversation. It would be great to hear how your breakout discussions went. Got lots of people coming back into the chat at the same time, so I'm going to wait until everybody's back. Okay, so it would be great to hear how your breakout discussions went. Do you have ideas for things that you'd like to implement in your settings now? Were there any questions that came up as a result of your thinking about how you might implement, or things that you're excited about doing? It would be fantastic to hear your thoughts in the chat.
CPD for staff team a priority. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really great points. Yeah, we can see here also embedding the characteristics of effective learning. Yeah, there's so many elements of those characteristics that are fundamentally related to children's developing self-regulation. Yeah, absolutely. Really good points.
Well, do feel free to keep adding those in and we will pick up on them. We just wanted to highlight a couple of concluding points at this point. So there is still a lot for us to learn about how we support children's self-regulation, although we know its importance, and not just now, but over the long term as well, for their lifelong mental health and well-being. And we've talked about the kind of brains being born and built. So self-regulation does depend on both nature and nurture. And the positive experiences of care, communication and play that you guys are providing every day are making the difference to those children already. Obviously, there are things that we can do to consciously and carefully build up their self-regulation as well. Jackie has added in setting up an agreed time to explore and challenge what they're going to do, and looking at the learning environment. I'm so glad that you mentioned both of those parts, because it is so easy to say we're going to look at our learning environment, but actually finding the time to sit down with the key stakeholders, the people who are going to implement it, is actually just as important, isn't it, to making that happen. And again, Sharon has talked about reevaluating the environment, which areas are supporting talk opportunities more and those that aren't. That would be fascinating, wouldn't it, to have the opportunity to take a step back and see where the talk is happening and if it's the kind that you want, and to think about why that might be the case. That sounds like a really interesting project to embark on. We have come pretty much to the end of our series on self-regulation in the early years foundation stage. We would love to stay in touch. I've put Fliss and mine and the East London Research School's Twitter handles on there. We can also be contacted via email at the East London Research School as well. And we do work with schools and early years settings with implementation as well. As a research school, it's part of our work is to help you to kind of translate that research into practice. So if there are areas that you're thinking about working on, you want to reach out to us and brainstorm some of the ways that you might be able to do that, then please do let us know. I really appreciate you making the time at this kind of dark time of year, when the time between 3:45 and 5 means that you are leaving in the pitch black rather than just at the end of the day. It's been great to hear about your work that you're doing already, and your interest in self-regulation as well, and really wish you the best of luck for the last stretch of the term, and fingers crossed for a fun and social festive season as well. Thank you so much for all of your time.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening, and yeah, the last few days and weeks of term, keep going and have a wonderful break when you get there. Thank you.